During the course of running this channel, my path has crossed with some interesting people, some by accident who provide a lead for a video, and some who have become good friends. There are sometimes people who I hope our paths will cross, and one of these chance encounters took place earlier this year. Through a series of phone calls, I've pieced together the story of the world of number station's most prevalent group, and I also received a VHS tape that contains a documentary which hasn't been seen publicly for 30 years. This is the untold story of Enigma, the number station's monitoring group, and I'll play you in full the rare documentary that the government may not have wanted to air. The person I've had the pleasure of getting to know is Chris Midgley. He founded what became the Enigma number stations group. Like the topic they covered, the history of the group is largely lost to time, so let me fill you in here on some of those lost snippets. Chris subscribed to the British DX Club, a long-standing association of radio hobbyists and enthusiasts based in the UK. In the early 1990s, he decided to put a notice in the club's news bulletin, asking if anybody else was hearing these strange and eerie number stations, and would they like to discuss and compare notes as it were. At the same time, Chris received the Simon Mason book, Secret Signals, the Euro Numbers Mystery, and like many of us have, headed down the number station rabbit hole. A man called Mike Gaufman contacted Chris through the DX Club and they arranged to meet in Bradford at a public location, both understandably nervous about the other's intrigue into secret government transmissions. Before long, Enigma, the European Numbers Information Gathering and Monitoring Association, was set up in 1993. Chris and Mike put hundreds of hours of research and monitoring into a hard copy newsletter which could be purchased, and it wasn't long before people from around the world were contributing information. They originally released 3 newsletters a year before reducing it down to 2, and the content of these 18 publications gave us the first in-depth number stations research we rely on so much today. They gave us timings and scheduling, locations, and names such as the Lincolnshire Poacher and its ID E03, just one of many dozens. Enigma gave us the first and still used system of classifications for the stations. This was the room that the Enigma newsletter came from, Chris Midgley's Radio Shack, which is still a radio room today, over 30 years since it began. Nobody made any money from the newsletters. In fact, the money received for them just about covered paper, copying and postage materials. The address people wrote to get copies of the newspaper was in Bradford, and numerous embassies and consulates very openly bought them. It's safe to assume that many intelligence agencies did too. It makes sense that they'd make use of a handy low-cost directory of the US and Europe's number station activity. Enigma held meetings for like-minded enthusiasts to attend, and myself and Chris did discuss the possibility of people from the intelligence community attending. Again, it would make sense. I asked Chris if he had any dealings with intelligence over the years, or maybe a warning from the Secret Service not to produce the newsletters, and he didn't, but there was one interesting story that came to mind. Chris was at work one Friday lunchtime soon after Enigma began. All telephone calls went through a receptionist, and the receptionist called Chris to let him know a call was waiting. She said, "There's a call for you from a Mr. Adcock from the Ministry of Defence." Chris, naturally quite shocked by this, picked up the phone and said hello. The man on the other end asked Chris to confirm his name and where he worked. He said, "Is this Chris Midgley?" Chris replied with yes. The man confirmed where Chris worked and then said, "That's all I need to check with you. Thank you for taking the call." The call ended, and when Chris told Mike Gaufman about the incident, they realised that Adcock is a type of direction-finding antenna system. Mr. Adcock found Chris's name and where he worked. His work address was never linked to Enigma whatsoever. Perhaps this was a veiled message to Chris and Mike, letting them know that Big Brother was watching. Enigma suffered from lower and lower contributions as the 1990s came to a close. It became harder and harder to put the newsletters together, and with life, family and a career naturally coming first, Chris decided to leave Enigma. Mike released 1 or 2 more newsletters himself before giving up. The group ultimately disbanded in 2000, before a resurgence by the Enigma 2000 group, who continued monitoring efforts faithfully, and still do to this day. Mike Gaufman disappeared publicly from the numbers and monitoring community from 2000. Chris last saw him a few years ago by chance on a day out, but has since lost contact with Mike. He told Chris he was still monitoring the number station's scene, but when Chris later tried to phone and write to Mike, his number had changed and he'd moved house. It would be nice to reunite them again, so Mike, if you're watching, please contact me. If anyone knows Mike, please could you let him know. Chris and Mike featured in a BBC Here and Now documentary, which first aired on Monday the 21st of April 1997 on BBC One. Sue Lawley presented the Current Affairs magazine show, which ran from 1994 to 1998. This is perhaps the only tape in existence. Simon Mason shared some photograph screenshots back in the early 2000s, but this documentary has never been aired publicly since 1997. It only aired twice, and the second airing was a late-night repeat.
On Here and Now at 7:30, the men of God who become men of violence and beat up their wives.
I remember him once in praying for people who were abused, and I nearly fell off the pew.
When the water runs out, the families cutting themselves off because they can't pay. And I spy why the radio airwaves are buzzing with strange messages.
The secret agent's code seems to begin with the word heffalump.
That's Here and Now in half an hour on BBC One. Don't miss it.
What's interesting is that the show was dropped mysteriously with little notice from its original first air date. Enigma told readers and friends when it would air, but it didn't, and it was pushed back by a week. As you'll see, a segment was filmed at Menwith Hill, the top-secret government spy base in West Yorkshire. Chris and the BBC team were very quickly approached at Menwith Hill when they got out of their vehicles. Security said they were blocking the road, but they were on a public highway. Nevertheless, the base security made them move to a more distant spot much further away. They asked the film crew what they were doing and for whom. It would make sense that the base then contacted the BBC and vetted the documentary before it was released, hence the pushback date. For all Menwith Hill knew, the BBC could have been saying anything about the sensitive installation at a time when much less was known about it than today. Here's the documentary in full. I'll talk over two small segments due to copyright infringement relating to the Mission Impossible theme used in the documentary.
That London bus is about to drop off an old friend back to Albert Square in EastEnders in half an hour. First on BBC One, Here and Now with Sue Lawley.
Tonight on Here and Now with Sue Lawley.
The men of God who became men of violence.
I remember him once in praying for people who were abused, and I nearly fell off the pew.
The wives, beaten up by their clergyman husbands, break their silence. The water shortage that's got nothing to do with the weather.
And I had to walk round to the mother-in-law's when it was dark to get buckets of water so that I could just bath my children.
Why some families are cutting off their own water supply. And I spy, why are the airwaves full of numbers?
1, 2, 3. The secret agent's code seems to begin with the word heffalump.
What have the Cold War and Winnie the Pooh got in common?
Here and Now with Sue Lawley, Steve Annett, Anastasia Cook, Shankar Guha, Denise Mahoney and John Walters.
The Cold War may be over, but spying is still big business, and radio hams around Britain have been excited to discover that the airwaves continue to hum with strange communications. Numbers read, apparently, in random order. To find out what it's all about sounds like Mission Impossible. Not for John Walters.
This introduction sequence was filmed separate to Chris and Mike's segment and features British radio and television producer and presenter John Walters meeting his handler deep in the woods. It's a nod to the television show Mission Impossible, in which a tape recorder self-destructs after the message has been heard. The only disappointing element of this documentary is how Here and Now put a novelty and comedic slant on the topic.
Some people think all cars are the same.
It doesn't set out to solve the mystery with a great deal of seriousness. I suppose a warning from Menwith Hill and the Secret Service might do that.
Mr. Walters, we have been contacted by a group called Enigma, who claim that governments across the world are broadcasting coded messages known as numbers stations. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, spies to discover whether these number stations exist and what is their purpose. This recording will self-destruct in 10 seconds. Good luck, John.
I discovered number stations started in the First World War. Using shortwave radio, spy chiefs sent instructions to their agents in the field using just strings of numbers. Each spy had a personal piece of text which meant only they could crack the numbers code. The Cold War's over now, but my mission suggests that there are still spies and they're still sending secrets on these number stations. Time to meet the mysterious Enigma. Enigma is a band of radio amateurs who listen to and log number stations, then publish the details in a magazine. They found them all over the shortwave dial. Spying, it seems, is alive and well.
The Russian man with 50 ending has been on.
Yes.
They know where they're coming from. Former communist countries in the main. They know how they work, but they don't know what's being said. Chris showed me how a spy would decode a number's message. Like any spy, I needed my own personal piece of text. Now, the radio has given us a string of numbers. What do I do now?
So the first ones will be 54, which might be a page number.
Yeah, OK. Winnie the Pooh, page 54, yes.
Then 05, which might be line 5.
So if I go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah?
And a 3, which is probably word 3.
Word 3?
Yep.
1, 2, 3. Well, that means the secret agent's code seems to begin with the word heffalump. Must be something wrong with the machine.
Enigma is trying to promote and bring into the public eye what number stations are.
Yes, but your magazine, I mean, who reads it?
We've got hundreds of members all over Europe, but also intelligence services and embassies are reading the newsletter.
Government agencies don't just read Chris's newsletter. They're listening, like him, on better equipment.
This is one of the world's largest monitoring stations. Without a doubt, it definitely will be receiving espionage transmissions.
Oh, when they get these numbers and so on off the shortwave stations, what can they do with them?
Well, they archive a lot of the numbers. Hopefully, in the event of catching one of the agents, they can then backtrack over many, many years of messages. And they also spend a great deal of time and effort trying to locate where the numbers transmissions are coming from.
There are dozens of listening stations all over Britain, and they're a devil of a job to find. They're the ears of the experts. MI6, GCHQ, and the DTI. I wanted to check Enigma's claims with them, but though they may be listening, they're certainly not talking. I phoned them, I faxed them, but the men from the ministry seem to prefer to print their reply, falling back on that old standard, the brief comment.
The radio you saw being used to receive the number station was a prop that Mike Gaufman brought to Chris's house, but he was a private man who preferred not to appear on camera.
I've come up against a brick wall. I mean, we know the stations exist, we know what they're doing. I mean, unofficially, we even know who's listening to them, but why are they carrying on today? What is it they're saying? If the intelligence service won't talk, what's the next best thing? Rupert Allison. He operates undercover as spy writer Nigel West. My mother is eating kippers with the Countess tonight.
Will they be well smoked?
Very. Presumably you're aware of these number stations.
Oh yes, there are probably more intelligence agents operating in the UK now than at any time in the past, and this is the way that they communicate.
Isn't it rather a primitive method? I mean, is there any real future in, well, number stations?
Well, it may be primitive in one sense, but that is the beauty of it, that it is so obvious. Nobody has produced a better replacement because the recipient of these broadcasts can be virtually anywhere in the world, and they are untraceable.
I had to speak to a spy, and where better to find one than Cambridge University, you know, Burgess and Maclean. They were so enthusiastic they finished up working for the Russians as well. I'd heard double agent Oleg Gordievsky was being interrogated by some students, so I lied slightly about my age and plugged my way into their debate. What was in the messages then? That might sound very naive to you, but what kind of information was transmitted?
The messages are a mixture of the professional instruction, what to do next, and some personal messages from children, parents, and friends. For example, Mr. Gorbanov, next week, please go to Vienna and use the dead letter box number 13. You will find 8,000 American dollars. It is your salary for the next month and the rest for your operational expenses.
3,971.
Well, Gordievsky could find his personal messages end up in the charts. Akin Fernandez, fresh from success with Sounds of the Aurora Borealis, is about to launch his next record, a quadruple CD of number stations.
To me, it's just incredible that such a thing can exist in this day and age, in the age when you can pick up a telephone and make a call anywhere in the world, that people are using shortwave radio to communicate like this, and it doesn't make any sense at all. My first response was that there must be a recording put out at once.
Mission accomplished. We know they exist, they're even on CD. We know their purpose for spy speak. But what we really want to know is what's being said, isn't it?
Sometimes I think that it would be a bad thing, because if somebody were to crack, say, a number station code, they would stop using them for sure, and then they would be off the air.
1 5 3 9 7 1